in the background of that song, you might have heard somebody actually having James Taylor do something that sounded good, because he's singing background on that, and so that's one of the things that Carole King was able to do is put James Taylor to good use.
Nice.
Yeah. So Carole King, well,
and not in the bedroom.
Yeah, that was Joni Mitchell. So
Carly Simon, in fairness,
Joni Mitchell too. He was with Joe
All
at this
of
time. It was pretty much everyone except Carole King. So this comes in at in Best Ever Albums. It's numbered 61 in the 1970s and ranked number 11 in the year 1971 with an overall rank of 259. Rolling Stone ranks it as 25 in the overall top 500 albums. So
wow,
very highly regarded album.
Yeah.
And can I mention that all three of these albums are on the top 1,001 albums you must hear before you die? Cloud Top 2.
There's 1,001 now?
There are now 1,021 as of 2010. So,
oh, wow.
Yeah.
Jeez, okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right,
that was the last time the list was updated.
So they keep adding to it. They're not like replacing them. They don't just decide.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
It's like a bad blog from like the early 2000s, that just like became like a run-on blog, right? Just keep adding to it. That's kind of like what the list is.
If you go out of your way to listen to one of these records, you can rest assured that it's not going to be taken off one day and be like, well, that was a waste of 45 minutes listening to that album.
And what I'm going to do is in Cleaning the Stacks in upcoming weeks, I'm going to name the albums that we didn't cover from some of the years that we didn't cover. Just do 1 year each episode so as not to be overwhelming. So we'll do 1970 next week.
Okay. Cool. So this record was recorded in just a couple of weeks in January of 1971, and it was released on February 10th of that year. There's 2 singles from the album, including It's Too Late and So Far Away. And Carole King, man, this is a titan of an album, guys. Mm-hmm. Like the research that I was doing behind this is like, this is an album that just changed so many things, broke so many records, and is just it's one of those classic records that has really stood the test of time in a lot of people's minds. But Carole King, you can look at her as being probably the most successful female songwriter of the latter half of the 20th century. She's has written or co-written 118 songs that made their way to the Billboard Top 100, and 61 songs that made it to the hits charts in the UK.
Wow. She
was born Carole Joan Klein on February 9th, 1942 in Manhattan to 2 parents that were mother was into piano. She was a piano player, and she taught Carole to play the piano when she was 3, and by the time that she was 4, her parents realized that she had something called absolute pitch, which is just a very keen sense of music and notes. She's actually able to like hear a note, and she could tell you, oh, that's an A, or that's a that's
like
a
a
B.
superpower.
Yes. She just knew what was up, and so when her mother saw that happening, she decided, okay, now I need to up the ante here, and started teaching her musical theory and basic and more piano parts. And King was infatuated with music and wanted to learn as much as she could. And she was also very precocious. She begins kindergarten at the age of 4, and she's then promoted to the 2nd grade after that. So she graduates high school very early. And at that time, she changed her name from Carole Klein to Carole King. And she also became friends with Paul Simon. They did not go to high school together, but they somehow crossed paths, and they would record demos together. And so this was kind of crazy. She would just, at like the age of 15 or 16, she would just walk into the Brill Building in Times Square, which is this building where people could just come off of the street. There'd be pianos in there, and there'd be music execs and publishers. You play a song. Yeah.
They wrote like every song of the 60s, the Brill Building. Yeah.
Yes. But it's like they would just take people off the street to do it. So she walks in and she just starts playing songs, like, all right, we'll buy that song for $25 or we'll take that song, and that's how a lot of those songs were written. Wow. So she got her name doing that, just walking in at that young age. And she goes on to attend college, Queens College, and that's where she meets Jerry Goffin, who is becomes her songwriting partner and later her husband. And they got married at the age of when she was 17, after she became pregnant with their first child. And they quit college and they start making it their full-time job of just writing songs. And so sometimes it would take them as quickly as 20 minutes. Somebody would come up and say, okay, we need you to write a song for this artist, or write a song that has this theme or whatever. And so Carole King would write the music and Jerry Goffin would write the lyrics. Often it was kind of seen as, her music, her writing style was much more upbeat, and Goffin would put lyrics to it that were a little bit more somber, a little sadder, a little darker. And it kind of reminded me of that Tom Waits line, I like beautiful melodies telling me terrible things, and that's kind of what, a lot of the songs that they've written were kind of, were going for. So they write a bunch of songs together, and they get their first number one hit, Will You Love Me Tomorrow, which was recorded in 1960 by the Shirelles, and that's one of the songs that we have on this album that Carole King recorded many years later. And that was also the first number one song by an all-black female group. So after this, they quit their day jobs. At that point, I think Goffin was working as a chemist and King was a secretary, but they quit their day jobs and they focused solely on writing. The songs that they've written, we've covered many of them, include things like Chains, which was on the Beatles album, The Locomotion, who I never knew the artist behind that. Do you guys know who did The Locomotion?
Little Eva, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Little Eva, the way that they found her, she was first the nanny, because when they started writing songs, they needed a little help around the house, or at least she did, I'm sure. and Little Eva would be singing, and they're like, she has a pretty good voice. We should record her, and that's how Little Eva got her career going. They wrote One Fine Day, which was a song by the Drifters, Pleasant Valley Sunday, which we covered with the Monkees, John. I'm into Something Good by Herman's Hermits, and if you ever want to laugh, want to laugh at a video, you should just YouTube Herman's Hermits singing that.
Yeah.
I don't think that they could pass as a rock band today with the vibe that they were going for back then. And of course, You Make Me Feel Like a Natural Woman by Aretha Franklin, which Jerry Goffin did write the lyrics to that. So that's one of the, the great things about him was that he wrote from the woman's perspective, and he did it pretty well, I'd say. But unfortunately, by 1968, they separate. Carole King wanted a much quieter life. She wanted to live in the suburbs, kind of away from things. But Jerry Goffin wanted to live in the city and party. He actually cheats on her several times, and oftentimes would tell her ahead of time that he's going to do so. And that did not sit well with Carole King. So they break up, and she heads out to Laurel Canyon in 1960.
How do you think that talk goes? Like you just is it a series of imperative sentences? Is it like loose-ended questions? How do you think that conversation goes?
I was wondering that too, because I heard that there's a documentary on Carole King. It's on Amazon Prime that came out a couple years ago. That was pretty good. And I was wondering, they didn't really cover that. They just said that the guy's like, yeah, he would kind of just say this is what he's going to do. So not sure exactly. So she leaves Jerry Goffin. She takes the two kids out to Laurel Canyon in 1968, and she releases an album with a band that she formed called The City. And but she's kind of reluctant to perform live. She's not really, she's kind of a quiet and quiet person who doesn't really like the limelight too much. She's got some stage fright, so it didn't really help the sales of the record. And then she just decides, you know what, I'm going to start focusing on some solo stuff. She meets James Taylor and Joni Mitchell, and she recorded her first album, Writer, and then she goes on to write and perform this album, Tapestry, with producer Lou Adler, and they were very careful not to overproduce it. They felt like at the time, with the 70s sound and what the types of songs that she was writing, that this could be an album that was very overproduced, had a ton of instruments. And while there are a lot of artists playing on this, if you look at all the cast of people that are contributing, it doesn't seem like there's a ton of stuff. It's not like wall of sound stuff like Phil Spector. They're trying to kind of keep it a little bit more stripped down. It took 3 weeks to record. They were very efficient, sometimes recording 3 songs in a day, and the cost of recording the album was $22,000. But this album, even though it took a little while to start selling, it eventually becomes one of the best-selling albums of all time. At that time, it was actually the best, highest-selling album of all time. I looked on Wikipedia right now; it's number 42 in the best-selling albums of all time. It reached diamond status in 1995, which is at least 10 million, and now it's sold over 25 million copies worldwide. There's a bunch of records that were set with this album. It's like one of those things that first of all, I think a couple things happened. I think women started participating in being music consumers, and Carole King was was certainly an artist that was that a lot of females gravitated towards. A lot of her concerts were very female dominated in attendance and buying records, and that's one of those things now. Like if you really want to sell a bunch of albums, you got to get the women involved, and Carole King certainly did that. You're also seeing
Metal
Go
has
ahead.
really tried to transcend that idea, Matt. So,
Yes,
yeah.
yes. So she goes on and selling. This album's like at number 1 for 15 straight weeks, which was a record that no other female artist had until Whitney Houston broke it over 20 years later with The Bodyguard. I think Adele has that record now with 21. I think that was like, I don't know, 24 weeks or 25 weeks or something. But the album won 4 Grammys, including Best Female Pop Vocal Performance, Song of the Year for You've Got a Friend, Record of the Year for It's Too Late, and Album of the Year. And do you guys know what's the difference between Song of the Year and Record of the Year?
The songwriter versus the performer?
Pretty much, yeah. It's the song of the year is based solely on the songwriting itself, and the record of the year is more about the overall production, the overall package, if you will. It's almost like song of the year is best screenplay, and the record of the year is more of the
Best Picture.
Best picture. Correct.
Gotcha.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So yeah, remained in the Billboard charts for over about 6 years, something like that. Which is sounds like a lot. It's not even close to Pink Floyd's 18 and a half years, but we'll get to that one later. The Dark Side of the Moon's just, I think it's still probably on the charts. So yeah, I got a few things to wrap up with Carole King. I can do that in the latter part of the segment. I think this is the only album of hers that we're covering. She's got a bunch, but this is a huge album. And let's hear what you guys think of this. So we will start with. I think I got to go with Josh.
Okay.
What do you think, Josh?
Well, first of all, did you guys notice that all of the most popular songs by her on Spotify were off of this album? I don't ever see that. It's all like the same album cover art.
Yeah, it's not even close. I mean, this is number 259 of all time. Her next album, Fantasy, on Best Ever Albums is 5,081.
Yeah.
So this is her big album for sure.
Yeah, I mean, this is definitely the indication of why she was such a talented songwriter and artist. I mean, all of these songs are fantastic. Now, I don't know how much like just the singer-songwriter solo singing at the piano like holds up as a whole like album listen through. But all of these songs are really good, and taken one at a time or on their own. I mean, it's just great. I feel the Earth Move is really like a fantastic way to open the album, and then you get hit after hit on this album. Carole King is one of those artists where I think I knew these songs before I knew they were by Carole King. They're just kind of in the ether, always playing, on the radio or in the in the grocery store, or like all over the place. They're just kind of so accessible, and everyone loves them, and you can feel that listening to this album. I think you get her upbeat attitude about life listening to this album and listening to the lyrics. Like Matt said, she was the more upbeat of the two of her writing partner, and I think you get right from the get-go about even something like sad, like someone leaving, it's still kind of like bittersweet, and there's a positive spin to it. And I also obviously know Where You Lead as the Gilmore Girls theme. Mm-hmm. So I always have that association with her as well. I mean, for an album that's got how many tracks? 12? I mean, at least like probably, I don't know, 8 to 10 you probably know without knowing this album. I think my favorite song that I didn't know or hadn't heard before is Way Over Yonder. I thought that was a really good song. And I agree with Matt too. I think that on the first listen you think, well, it's just all piano and her. But then as you listen to the song, they they sprinkle all of this stuff kind of in the background to kind of deepen the songs and add some layers to it. And I thought that was really effective. I think I actually heard You Got a Friend, if not from her, then from the Me First and the Gimme Gimmes cover of that, which is a punk band that just does covers of songs. And that was on one of their albums. So I kind of knew the lyrics and I was like, why is this song so slow? When I was used to it being a lot faster. But yeah, it's undeniable that this is a great album and that she's a great artist. But on the other hand, I don't know if I would just listen to this album on, on shuffle. I would just listen to songs probably than just, it's almost like I think anybody that's just like, and not just female singer-songwriters, but any like male singer-songwriter that's just on the pianos, them singing, there's just not enough variety for me to have a sustained listen to them. But I did enjoy this album, so I'm just that's kind of a minor point for me, really.
Yeah,
right.
This
John?
album's almost impossible to talk about as a piece of music because it's like the zeitgeist, right?
Yeah.
In many ways. This is, gosh, where do we even start? You've got a brill-building songwriter who writes these songs that you would imagine from the 60s, the tightest of build-ups to hooks that are there with, immaculate melodies, positive lyrics, just radio-friendly songs right off the bat. So you've got that skill set right there. An established songwriter, accomplished performer who is a reluctant performer, but also clearly has the chops. You also have the creation of pretty much the singer-songwriter, female singer-songwriter archetype that would carry all the way through, like the Lilith Fair and modern female singer-songwriters. It's either her or Laura Nyro, really, when you think about it, who created that prototype, and we've covered both. But she's creating that right here. So right there, there's a real argument to be made that she is the first definitively traditional feminine songwriter who broke into the mainstream in American popular music. Would you guys agree? I mean, because Janis Joplin actively tried to fight that, right? Jefferson Airplane was the girl in the band. Laura Nyro did a lot of this, but didn't ascend to universal, as Josh said, hear these songs in Starbucks, the mall, commercials, Gilmore Girls, stuff like that. So you've got all that going for you. All the way down to the cover, which is her barefoot with a cat in the foreground in what looks to be a modestly decorated house or apartment, just sort of in a contemplative type of picture. It's at the time, I'm sure it was amazing to see that if you were a consumer of music who was female, but we've come to know it as an archetype. Then you throw in that all of these songs were heavily backed and played on the radio, as I was reminded by many women in my life who lived through this period, that she was a troubadour for that era. It's all of that comes together to make and then the sales. So it's, as Matt said, it's one of the 50 greatest selling albums of all time. And in its time, there were no albums almost this big on the American charts at the time that it was released, which I think you have to know. And then the musicians playing behind her are clear. Matt, is it the Wrecking Crew behind her? Because that's sort of that feel to it.
I didn't read anything about the Wrecking Crew. The only people that I recognized from the names were James Taylor and Joni Mitchell.
Okay.
I'm not sure about the Wrecking Crew. I didn't read about that.
But you've got very accomplished musicians behind her. You can tell these are people that have kind of either worked with her on other albums or in songs and things along that. And then you have 2 songs on this album that are tacked on that are known quantities. You Make Me Feel Like a Natural Woman is one of Aretha Franklin's biggest songs, and she does a very different take on it. And Will You Love Me Tomorrow, the Shirelles did that originally. I mean, there's it's been covered so many different times that you can do it each. I am not a fan of that song. I actually was shocked you picked that song, Max. I think it's by far the worst song on the album.
That's a terrible take. You're so wrong. My God.
I like the Shirelles version better.
It really is not a bad take. I think pretty much everybody thinks that's one of the worst takes of this compared to the girl group versions of it. So
I'm not saying it's better than that.
Opinion, but
okay,
I mean,
all right.
I don't think I'm in the minority on that one, man. I think that's kind of like how it's looked at right there. But the rest of the songs are great. I mean, It's Too Late is almost a perfect pop song. You've Got a Friend, while I would argue is probably a minute too long, is still Where You Lead, So Far Away, I Feel the Earth Move. These are all songs that, even if you don't know this album, you know these songs. And if you don't know the songs themselves, you know songs that were inspired by those songs that came along 5, 10, 20 minutes later. I'm not even going to begin to start the amount of careers that were deeply influenced by Carole King, because we'd be going through just about every female singer-songwriter in the last 40, 45 years. There's still people doing elements of what Carole King was doing here, maybe not sonically, but similar things. And, Fiona Apple, Billie Eilish to some degree has elements of what this is. What's her name? Lana Del Rey. I mean, they're all, to some degree, indebted to this type of set. They did their own take on it. And in the 70s, my gosh, Carly Simon, Linda Ronstadt, Stevie Nicks later, and kind of what she built as sort of her. And all of this stuff spins off of a little bit of the archetype that Carole King built. So, I mean, this is a massively important album. And it's a very good sounding album that still sounds... for being as much an album of 1971 it doesn't sound as dated as some of the other albums that we've talked about from 1971. And that's another pretty impressive thing, that it's both of its time and can also transcend its time. So I would give this a definite thumbs up. It was my favorite album that we covered this week, and it does hold up, in my opinion.
Yeah, this album's like lightning in a bottle,
right.
in terms of just right person, right place, right time.
Absolutely.
I was about to say that this is also kind of, it's 1971, and you're starting to get a lot of the, like the college kids that were big, the fans of the 60s, the Woodstock generation, they're starting to get jobs, and they're starting to like have disposable income and buying albums. And, not many people, I was reading, not many people had record or televisions, so the record player became kind of like a centerpiece of your living room. So buying albums was kind of the thing to do. And it's like, and everybody had this record,
right.
And this is just something that was just so massive. It's perfect timing. I really like this. She's such a great songwriter, and it's one of those things where I listened to it once, and actually, Josh, not many of these songs sounded familiar to me, to be honest. I obviously knew It's Too Late, You've Got a Friend, and then Will You Love Me Tomorrow, and You Make Me Feel Like a Natural Woman. Of course, I knew those, but like a lot of these other ones, I think those might have been the only ones that I had known.
Wow, that's amazing to me, because I feel like some of these songs I've heard 100 times.
And maybe I have. I don't know. Nothing came. I was like, oh, I know that song. It just didn't. I didn't do that. And actually, the songs that I knew from other people. You've Got a Friend. Actually, I knew that from James Taylor. I always thought that was a James Taylor song, because that's that's where I heard that from. But yeah, she's just so good. She's a very unassuming person that's just got a wonderful gift for melody. And I'm just surprised. I think that when her version of Will You Love Me Tomorrow, I'm not saying it's better than the Shirelles version, but what I like about that, I like the stripped down version of it, and I love how there's that part where she's like, tonight, da 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 da, like the way when she does that with that stripped down version and just the vulnerable voice, it's just it just really highlights the melody there for me, and I just like it. I just think it's beautiful, and I actually like the background vocals of like Taylor and Joni Mitchell. It almost kind of makes it sound like a little bit of a country kind of a twist to it, which I liked as well. And I just I really like that. I like the different version there. I would be surprised if he's like, that's the worst track on here. I'm like, God, it's such a beautiful song. I don't care what version you do of that. That's such a, it's like, you can't mess with that. But the more I listened to this, the more I liked it. I kind of see what you're saying, Josh. Like, maybe, I don't know if you need more variety. I think there is variety here, but it's also within its own lane. So there's stuff that's the more upbeat stuff, like I Feel the Earth Move. I really like Smackwater Jack. I really liked Where You Lead. I mean, those are kind of more of those upbeat songs that are kind of, you got a groove to it. It's got a bounce, and then you've got slower kind of more ballads like So Far Away. And Will You Love Me Tomorrow? Tapestry's that's a great song, and then Way Over Yonder is kind of like, you could see her writing that song for someone like Aretha Franklin, because that's got more of the R&B, kind of thing going on there.
I almost thought it was a cover when I first heard it, because it sounded like that.
Yeah, and most of the songs here, even though that she was used to when she was writing songs, with Jerry Goffin, he was doing the lyrics, but most of these songs, are hers straight up. She did get a lyricist, a woman by the name of Toni Stern, who did write the lyrics for a couple of these songs, like It's Too Late, Where You Lead, and there's a couple of obviously Goffin King songs, but most of the songs on here, she wrote up straight up herself, this is kind of one of those things I was thinking when I was listening to this, and I knew she was a big, friend of James Taylor. She toured with him, and they were, they still are very good friends. And Joni Mitchell, who was actually recording Blue in the same recording studio at the time that this was being recorded. So I know we're going to talk about that. And the Carpenters as well. They were the third act that was in the same studio at this time. So I was thinking about like the whole James Taylor thing and how I, kind of shit on him, and he's got like one of the songs that he's done on this album. But I just think that, to me, it's kind of in that same sonic lane. But I just think that her songwriting is just it's so good. It's really showcased here. And I'm shocked that she, I thought that after researching this, I would see that she, kind of just, she moved to Idaho, right? Like she kind of loved being in the wilderness and doing her own thing and away from the spotlight. And I was like, oh, she just kind of stopped doing music. Maybe she just kept writing for other people. But no, she's got tons of albums, but they never even came close to what this was. And that's just surprising for me that someone that's so talented, I'm not saying she should have recaptured this exact album, but should have done a heck of a lot better maybe than what she had put out. So, I found that kind of interesting when I was doing the research. That
happens a lot though with that, like artists that are the zeitgeist. That sometimes you get that one or two, and it's hard to recapture that when you get that big on your debut.
Like Smash Mouth.
Yeah. Yes, except not at all.
Did they capture the zeitgeist?
No.
I hope not.
No, there's, in a totally different sonic universe, but an example I'll give you a little bit of that is kind of like Boston, the band Boston, and that they had this debut album that sold one of the few albums that's ahead of Carole King on highest selling albums of all time, I think, is like Boston. And they're another one that they create this monolith that creates stadium rock in many ways. And then so they sound nothing like Carole King, but it's not unprecedented to have that happen. And I think after you do something this polished with this much, it's hard to live back up to that, and it's also hard to keep up with all of the people who are clearly inspired by you doing deviations of it. And that might be a little bit of what happened, I think.
Yeah,
Go ahead. She's clearly a genius, right? Because not knowing any of her biography, starting school and having the absolute perfect pitch or whatever you called it, absolute pitch, like, and just being able to write songs so quickly, that's like an unreal, uncanny talent. So it's not just it may have been lightning in a bottle for this album, but it's not her talent that's lightning in a bottle.
No, for sure. I mean, at the age of 15 in like the late 50s, walking into a studio, walking this Brill building in Times Square, just like blowing people away. It's like, that doesn't happen very often. So, yeah, but she goes on, and like I said, she kind of, moves away from, L.A. Oh, go ahead.
Can I give you a great example of what I was just trying to capture, by the way? Mm-hmm. And it's once again, nothing, Sex Pistols. Same idea. Zeitgeist moment, right? Never really followed up on.
Yeah, but they were kind of crazy, wasn't it? Drugs and like all the crazy
but
antics
you're
of their personal lives too?
You're missing my take, though. Like, they were the definition zeitgeist band of what was coming in an era. in all fronts, right? They represented a time, a place probably better than anyone else, and then there was no follow-up. And tons of people did what they did but deviated from it. So in many ways, Carole King is for female singer-songwriters and the progression of women into the musical landscape, what the Sex Pistols were for that stripped-down punk music with the image and creating the whole thing.
Okay.
There you go. That's kind of my great comparison there, I think.
All right.
Yeah. Yep. So, so just to close up on, because it's the only time we're really covering her as an artist. She does, she basically still lives in Idaho. She kind of, moved out there. She's done a lot of political work with trying to, pass bills that help with legislation, trying to, preserve the Rockies. But she gets all these awards. She's added to the National Recording Registry, another album that's one of the 50 albums that was placed there. And she also received the Gershwin Prize for popular song, and that's like a newer award that was established in 2007, and it's regarded as one of the highest honors that a songwriter or a musician can achieve. She's the first woman to receive it. Obama presented it to her several years ago. I thought that was kind of an interesting thing because the other recipients included some people that were like, okay, that makes sense. And then some other people I was like, huh? Like Paul Simon was the first recipient. And then you've got Stevie Wonder and Paul McCartney, Burt Bacharach. And then there was Carole King. And then Billy Joel, which I was like, that's interesting. Okay, I'm not gonna. I kind of like Billy Joel, but that surprised me. Willie Nelson's on there, Smokey Robinson, Tony Bennett, and Gloria Estefan and Garth Brooks are all on that list as well. So I thought that was kind of an interesting. I'm like, how do people figure that out? How do people vote on that? Because that's, I don't know if I would put all those people in the same ballpark together. But she's also collaborated with other artists like Semisonic and Slash for some of her. Yeah, so she's kind of and a lot of other artists as well. Inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as a songwriter in 1990, and this year she will be inducted as a performer finally into 2021.
There you go.
Right. Yeah, listen to this album if you haven't heard it. So
you kind of
put that
have
under
to
your
listen.
belt. Yeah,
you have to listen to this album if you want to understand 70s music. It's one of, regardless of how you feel about it, it's one of the 5 most important albums of the 70s. Mm-hmm. And there's an argument to be made it's one of the top 10 to 15 most important albums in terms of its influence in all of popular music since 1965, I'd argue.
Yeah, that's a good, valid point.
Mm-hmm. There's very few albums that are the zeitgeist, and this is one of them.
And now